This is the fourth of these community seminars that we've done. If you go to our website, findope.net community seminars, you can get audio and video from the last three. The first one we did was on grief, and then we did one on forgiveness, and then the most recent one we did was on stress. So this is number 4. We're trying to do 2 of these a year, so we'll have another one this November. I'll give you the date for that later on. So there's a lot of content today. And at the same time, it will feel like we just barely scratched the surface. You'll feel like you're drinking from a fire hose. But that's part of the reason why you've got a booklet that's pretty extensive and has a lot of the content in it. So that's designed really to help make it easy to hold on to things and remember what we've worked through when it's so much material. Much of the content from today's seminar comes from materials provided by Peacemaker Ministries. This is their website, peacemaker.net. Ken Sandy was the founder of this, and they have been involved with mediating thousands of personal, church, business conflicts around the world. They've done everything from high-level corporate work to tribes in Africa to marriages, the full scope of conflict. So a good portion of our content today is from this book by Sandy and Johnson called Resolving Everyday Conflict. Now, if you read the book, it wouldn't correspond very well to a lot of the order, and several of our lists today are not from that. But there is also a bunch of content that is from this little book. So when you see quotation marks in your booklet or on the slides today, they're from this book. Now, let me give one really important caveat before we just say a brief word of prayer and get into the content. There are situations that go beyond the principles we're talking about today. They are that way because they involve danger or they involve illegal activity, to use 2 examples. So like you may have conflict between an employer and an employee, and it is not about personality, it is not about a disagreement, it's about an employee who's doing something illegal, right? And so please understand that I'm not talking about situations like that today, though these principles apply. And also realize that sometimes there's conflict in a family, not because of selfish arguments, but because of abuse, right? And so please recognize that things like physical danger and illegal activity are beyond the scope of what I'm talking about today. And please don't interpret anything I'm saying to mean that if there's harm being done, if there's something illegal being done, that you should stay silent. For example, we'll talk later about the principle of love covering things. Don't cover what's damaging and illegal. Okay? So please keep that in mind as we talk about all of this content. Okay, let's brainstorm. Talk to me about settings for conflict. Okay, settings. And so I'll just give you one to get started, and then you tell me a bunch more. So you can have settings like sports. So you can have fans on various teams that try to harm each other. You can have conflict between players who all want the playing time or want to be most important. You can have conflict between players and coaches over what should be done, etc. So talk to me about other settings, common settings for conflict. Not a trick question. Family. Okay, so that could be marriage, that could be siblings, that could be parenting, parents and children, or other extended family relationships. Where else? Okay, education. You could have conflict between students fighting for the same scholarships or whatever. You can have conflict between professors who want certain positions or importance. You can have conflict between administration and professors or parents and school board or all those kind of things. Okay, good. Finances? Okay, that's we're going to make here a list of types of conflict in a minute. And so we would put finances under our types list, because you could have financial conflict in sports or in families or in education or in, good? Work. Ah, Really?
Church.
No. Really? Church. How many of you worked in a work environment where it seemed like 75% of the interaction between employees was griping, either about the company or about each other? Been in a work environment like that? Whew. Okay. Church. How many of you have seen church conflict in your own church? Oh, wait. You don't go to my church, do you? Okay, work, church, education, family, sports. What else? Oh, neighborhoods. Okay, in neighborhoods. Neighbors with each other, neighbors with the HOA, HOA board members with each other. Okay, social media, yeah, that crosses a lot of these. I don't know where to put things now. Social media. And you know what we've left off this list? Is politics. Did you see it this week? Did you see that little clip from the House of the Democrats singing their taunt song after the bill, the health care bill? So conflict. Okay, so we've got lots of settings. It's wouldn't we say that in every setting that involves human beings you have conflict? Okay, so then let's talk about types of conflict. So what could those conflicts be about? Money is a huge one, of course. What other types of conflict can we have, or sources of conflict, reasons for conflict?
Worldview or ideology.
Okay. Worldview, beliefs, something like that. Good? What else? Oh, power. I want power. You've got power. I want your power. You're in the way of my power.
Ethics.
Let's not be too fancy here, okay? The temperature. The TV station. Are you guys warm, by the way? Is it warm in here? It is warm in here? It's pleasant? Yes! Conflict! We did it! All right. Those of you who like it, sit on this side, and those of you who don't like it, okay. Keep going.
Did you plan that?
No! That was good though, wasn't it? Great, okay. What else? Oh, come on, surely there are more than those 6 things.
Family disagreements.
Okay. Lots of things could fit under this category of family disagreements. Just differences in what people think should be done, right? We get it all the time in the hospital with disagreements about health care for mom or dad or grandma or granddad. Just 2 days ago, I was at a bedside with a 96-year-old lady and her daughter, who's her caregiver, and they were just yelling at each other. It's just been so difficult and such a hard journey for them. They're so tired. She's so sick of being poked and prodded and everything. And family disagreements. What else? Okay, so there are all these Christian, these intra-Christianity arguments, which was true in any religion, of course. There are disagreements about religious preferences, religious standards, religious beliefs, for sure. Priorities. Uh-huh.
Fame.
What?
Fame and attention.
Fame and attention. Okay, again, you want it, I want it, I'm going to get it from you, you're taking it from me.
Type of worship.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of fits in this overall religious category here. Go in the workplace. What else? What other types do we have in the workplace? It relates to money a lot, right? Pay raises and positions and that kind of stuff. Relates to power. Relates to ethics, whether we should do that or not. Okay, and in neighborhoods, we could write this. We have conflicts over appearance. You know, in our HOA, there's always fussing about the HOA rules and what your yard looks like and why the HOA is making me do this about my yard and that kind of things. Okay, so that's types. Now, what are some of the words that describe how you feel during conflict?
Frustrated.
Keep talking. I'm not going to turn back around.
Tense.
Angry.
Betrayed. Sad.
Bitter.
Revenge.
Hopeless. Afraid.
Entitled.
This one comes easy.
Yeah, that wasn't hard. Okay, I'm going to jump to another list. I know we could keep adding things there, but I want to jump to this list. What are some of the misguided things we do to try to resolve conflict? Maybe they're not entirely misguided, or maybe they're good but they don't work, or maybe they're really not good.
Silence.
Okay, silence. Sarcasm.
Sometimes just talking too much.
Okay, I'm going to write this way. Talking at, which is not the same thing as communicating.
Ignoring.
Ignoring.
Giving in. Running away. Blaming.
Blame. Run away. Give in. Ignore. Good.
Pretending.
Pretend.
I don't like character attacks.
Okay, that's enough for now. All right, hopefully that gets us kind of in gear thinking about the mess that this is. Let's talk about the cost of conflict. So we're in your booklets now, middle of page 2, the cost of conflict. Abby, could you bring me a book? Oh, I've got my own here. Never mind. So what does conflict cost? How much of the blessing of being a family is lost in tens of millions of American homes because life is just nearly constant conflict? How much productivity do American businesses lose each year because of workplace relationship conflicts? How many students are paying the price for the petty conflicts between professors and administration and things going on in their school? How many marriages end in divorce because of unresolved conflict? How many parents and their adult children spend decades with little or no relationship? One study a few years ago found that 1 out of 4 women in their 40s and 50s was on antidepressants. How much of that depression is related to relationship conflicts? How much alcoholism and other substance abuse involves masking the pain of broken relationships? How much community service never happens because people are trapped in their own conflicts and it's hard to think about serving others? American adults spend how many hours a day watching TV? It's a little over 5, I think. So between 35 and 40 hours a week watching TV. How is it possible that some of that is because it's harder to live in a real world where relationships are broken and easier to live in kind of a fantasy world where you don't have to actually relate to those people? How many times has conflict in one relationship cost us another relationship? How many times have we shied away from a relationship because we didn't know how to resolve the conflict, so we made peace by giving up on the relationship? How many physical diseases and other debilitating health conditions are related to the stress of broken relationships? Now, medical science isn't going to be able to prove a lot of those things, but just about any doctor will tell you it is a major factor. Not definable all the time, but a major factor in some diseases and other serious health conditions. So sometimes we feel like there's nothing we can do about conflicts, and we've lived with them for so long that we lose sight of how much they're really costing us. We start to maybe tolerate the damage because we don't even realize what is missing from our lives, what has been stolen by all of the conflict. So you could consider this: what does conflict cost you? And I know that's a big, long question. Can we go back to that for a second? I know that's a big, long question that you could think about for a long time, but hopefully already there are a couple things coming to mind for you in terms of what conflict has cost. Okay, let's talk about damaging responses. So that's kind of a little project you could come back and work on. But let's go to our second major theme here: damaging responses to conflict. Our responses to conflict and the responses of other people often cause most of the damage. It's not the conflict itself, but the responses to it. So we're going to introduce now this graphic that you also have in your booklet, and we'll be using this throughout the seminar today. And you see that in the middle here we have 4 peacemaking responses, and we'll talk about each of those later. But on the 2 outside edges, you see damaging responses. In a minute, we'll fill in these boxes under the chart, so don't worry about that right now. But on both ends of this arc, there is a damaging response and then an even more damaging response that comes after that. Once we take an escape or attack approach, once we get here or get here, we're likely to keep going further in that direction. So first on the left side, you see escape responses, flight and denial first, and flight. And escape responses usually come from fear that working through conflict does more harm than good and inevitably damages the relationship. Does that make sense? I don't want to pursue making peace because that's going to do more harm than good. And so when we feel that way, when we're certain that's going to be the case, we tend toward these escape responses. Now, the first of these is denial, or pretending that the conflict doesn't exist. So we can, you can put on a smile, you can act cheerful, you can give hugs, you can pretend like everything's okay, even though we know it's not. We have some of that on our list over here, right? Does denial solve conflicts? Well, if you get really lucky, maybe the other person will change significantly while you're in denial. But is that the way things usually go? Beyond denial then is flight, actually running away from the relationship. Stop communicating with the friend, end the marriage, leave the church, quit the job. Now again, are there times when you need to flee? Yes, okay. When there are dangerous and illegal situations, there are times when you need to flee. But here we're talking about those times when you could work on a relationship, but you give up and get out of the relationship because that's what's easiest. And usually we have a clear rationalization for ourselves as why we should do that, and usually the rationalization is the other person. Well, they're not going to fill in the blank, so there's no use trying. So off I go and leave that relationship behind. So the word we could use for these responses, you can write there is peace faking. When you're in denial or fleeing, it might look like a peaceful relationship, but that's actually faked. It's not actually a peaceful relationship. We're just using escape responses to get out of it. Then on the other side of the chart, we have attack responses, blame and assault. People use attack responses when they are more interested in winning a conflict than in preserving a relationship. They apply pressure to eliminate opposition. More interested in winning a conflict than in preserving a relationship. So, attack responses are done by loud, strong personalities, right? Are there quiet, subtle, manipulative ways to attack? Are there even quiet, subtle, manipulative ways to assault? Is verbal abuse always loud? No. So the two responses here really begin with blame. And we're not going to talk about that a lot, but that's obvious, right? It begins with, it's your problem, it's your fault. Of course, it's your problem. And then from that, and again, does blame solve conflicts? How many times in your life have you blamed someone else for a situation and their immediate response was, you are right, I was wrong, I'm sorry. Now, there have probably been some times when that should have been the response, but usually blaming doesn't get us anywhere. So unfortunately, what we do after blaming oftentimes is assault. Now that might sound like a strong word, but let's go ahead and use a strong word, because it might mean physical force. It might mean power plays, like trying to fire an employee because they're a threat. It might involve slander to damage somebody's reputation. It most commonly involves verbal assault, such as, and again, this can be loud, like yelling insults, or it can be quiet, like muttering sarcasm under your breath as you walk away. Of course, it might also involve litigation, as we'll talk about later. Lots of different ways we can attack. But in each of these scenarios, the common thread is I care less about a relationship than I do about winning. In each of the attack scenarios, I'm going to win. And so the word we could use for those responses is peace breaking. Now, one final thing to note about the chart for now, we're going to come back and talk about the peacemaking responses, but it is very easy to swing from one end of this chart to the other. For example, to deny and flee and hide in the corner, and then like an animal, what happens to an animal when you corner it? Right? So we deny, we flee, we're quiet, and then all of a sudden, whack, we fight back. Or hit and run, right? Attack, yell, say nasty things, and then silence after that. So don't think that we only choose one of these ends. We sometimes swing quickly back and forth between the two. So then we have here the consider question for you again. Which of those responses do you tend toward? One end or the other end, or swinging from one end to the other? I recently read a history of what happened in the decades after the arrival of the famous Mayflower, that ship of English settlers that established Plymouth Plantation in the early 1600s in New England. And why is this story, the Mayflower, well known? Because of Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving, the story of the cooperation between the settlers and the Indians, and there's idealistic American art like this. But there really was remarkable overtures made between the Indians and those settlers in the early years of Plymouth Plantation. That's part of the reason why the English settlers lived. What most people don't know is that 50 years after that settlement and the beginning of Plymouth Plantation, there was a terrible war. It's called King Philip's War. The funny thing is, King Philip's not English. King Philip was an Indian. And King Philip's War was an awful war between the settlers and the Indians that was devastating for New England in the 1660s. And the author I was reading said that in the early days, the Indians and those settlers worked very hard to build relationships. How hard was that? Did they share a language? That's why people like Squanto are so remarkable, because they acted like translators who helped bridge the language gap. Did they share a culture? You can hardly get two more distinct cultures than British culture and American Indian culture in the early 1600s. How much work did it take for them to work together? But a generation later that fell apart, and here's what he concluded. In the end, both sides wanted a place unfettered by obligations to others. The moment any of them gave up on the difficult work of living with their neighbors and all of the compromise, frustration, and delay that inevitably entailed, they risked losing everything. While the generation before them had said, we are going to work together and make this work, the generation after them said, this is too hard. Let's get rid of each other. And they tried. You've probably never done that with muskets, but have you ever done something like that? Where you reached a point where you said, it is just too difficult to even try to work with these people. Let's give up on the difficult work of trying. So there was peace faking involved. There was peace breaking involved. But unfortunately, unlike the generation before them, there was not peacemaking, a commitment to the difficult work of living with others. All right, so that brings us then to the call to peacemaking. So the Bible says this: if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. As far as it depends on you. That phrase tells us a lot, doesn't it? It tells us, first of all, that you're not going to have peaceful relationships with everyone. Because sometimes, no matter how much you do, they will not resolve the conflict. They're going to be dug in, they're determined, they're stubborn, they're selfish, no matter what. So you can only live at peace as far as it depends on you. But that phrase also tells us that sometimes, maybe many times, we could go farther in seeking to make peace with others. We get too comfortable with the conflict and its damage, or we take the easy road and just give up on the relationship, or we just peace fake, or we let assumption and fear take over and paralyze us when we could go farther. So sometimes, no matter how far you go, you're not going to get it resolved. But sometimes you should go farther. Ephesians 4 is talking about relationship conflicts when it says, make every effort. So then there's this consider question. Is there a particular relationship in which you know you really need to go farther? All right, that's a hard question, isn't it? Because you probably have some relationships where you can't go any farther. They will not let you. But we should be slow to assume that's the case, right? Like that's kind of a last resort conclusion. But maybe you can think of a relationship right now where you've taken the easy route and you realize you could go farther in seeking peace. Now, going farther doesn't necessarily mean talking at them more to try to persuade them you're right or something like that. We're talking about going farther in peacemaking. So we've introduced attack responses and escape responses and the concept of peacemaking. So you see there are 4 peacemaking responses we're going to talk about. But before we get to those, we got to back up and lay some foundation, all right? So our next major theme is this: what is conflict? Here's Sandy's simple definition. Conflict happens when you're at odds with another person over what you think, want, or do. Pretty simple. But note that the source of it is where. Think, want. Where do both of those things happen?
In the mind.
Inside of you, right? Or do, that's an action then that comes out of it. So conflict is related to stuff inside of two people. We tend to see it as outside of us, as circumstantial. It really is rooted in some things that are inside of us. And it is important to recognize then that conflict isn't always bad. And that's partly because some conflicts are just simply from God-given diversity. Two people have different perspectives because they're two people. God created us with different strengths and different perspectives that can make us much stronger. If two people can recognize that their diversity is a benefit, then they can learn from each other and they can compromise instead of digging in, and the conflict can end up being beneficial. So here's a consider question. Can you think of a conflict in your life in which the conflict could actually be beneficial if each person would be humble to learn from the other? Conflict can result from diversity, not just from diversity, but also from miscommunication and misunderstanding. How often do we think we've said something clearly and then we learn that we communicated something completely different? Or how often do we think we understand someone else and then we learn we didn't really understand them at all? One of the hardest things for me as a counselor is when I listen to people talk and they're talking about another person with whom they're having conflict, and they're talking with certainty. And it's hard. I can't prove that they're not understanding all that correctly. I can't say, you're not right about that. But it's hard not to think, do you have all that right? You sound like you're sure you've got it all right. But do you have all that right about that other person? We can misunderstand so greatly. And misunderstandings, when they drag out over time, multiply. They feed off each other because you start to see what you want to see in other people. Does that make sense? You start to see what you want to see, what you think you're going to see. And so you get a perception of somebody and what you think they're thinking and what you think they're doing and what you think their problems are, and you'll start to see evidence of that everywhere you look. But it might not be what you think it is. So we might be at odds with someone because of diversity or over miscommunication or misunderstandings, and we could add other reasons. But for now, our point is this. These things are what Ken Sande calls the spark of conflict. People are different and they want different things. Differences, miscommunications, misunderstandings. This is the spark of conflict. And at this point, we could start to move towards some solutions that don't relate to the Bible at all. A marriage and family therapist can teach a lot of techniques to help with differences and miscommunications and misunderstandings. And some of those techniques and things can be very, very, very helpful. The idea, though, could be that if we learn some good techniques, we can avoid conflict. So what do you think about that? The reason why the world is so broken with conflict is because we haven't all learned the techniques for communicating better. Does that feel like it wraps everything up well? Like politicians, the reason why politics is so broken is because Democrats and Republicans don't know how to communicate with each other. How are we doing? 60%. 60%. Is there really more to it than that? And the answer is yes. And the question I really want to ask is, does the Bible offer more? Is there a uniquely Christian perspective on conflict resolution that is different, maybe not contrary to, but different from what just a marriage and family therapist could teach in terms of learning to compromise and listen and communicate and things like that? So we're going to make a list of 6 distinctly Christian perspectives on conflict resolution. They're all in your booklet. Number 1, desires become damaging because of our sinful heart. Now, I know the word sinful might make some people scared, but stick with me, okay, while I explain. Here's what the Bible says. This quote from Sandy first. Although much conflict is the natural result of God-given diversity and simple misunderstandings, many conflicts are the result of sinful attitudes and desires that lead to sinful words and actions. And we kind of saw this earlier, didn't we? We were talking about thoughts, and here we have attitudes and desires, things that are inside of us. So here's what the Bible says. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire but do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. So conflict begins because of our desires, but the desires themselves aren't necessarily the real problem. This might be the real problem. Are your desires running your life? Okay, look at the words from the Bible again. It's not the desire itself that's necessarily the problem. It's what you're willing to do because of that desire. The desires get us to do things we shouldn't do. Our desires end up running our life. We'll do whatever we have to do to get what we want. So the toddler will lay on the floor of the restaurant and scream. The teen will tell his mom and dad, who have loved him and poured their life into him for 16 years, he will look him right in the face and say, I hate you. The wife will give her husband a week's worth of silent treatment. The boss will yell at his employees. We'll do whatever we have to do to get what we want. And that's actually where the Bible says sin comes from. Same letter in the Bible, James chapter 1 says, each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin. The desire takes over. We'll do whatever we have to do to get that. And what ends up being born in that labor and delivery room is sin. So the reason why communication techniques aren't enough to solve all of our conflicts is because it's not just a communication problem. It's a heart and desire problem. See, if I want what I want, you can communicate perfectly clearly over and over again, and I could care less. Right? I can understand you with perfect clarity, and I could care less. I want what I want, and I'm going to get what I want. And so you see, this is where therapy runs into a wall, because at some point, the therapist has to start to get moral. You have to start to actually deal with desires and heart, not just tips for learning how to compromise with each other. If I want what I want and I'm going to get what I want, it's going to take more than techniques. I want what I want and I'm going to get it. That's pretty close to what the Bible calls sin, because we do that with God. We don't want God to tell us what to do. We want our way, not God's way. And that's really what sin is, not breaking some religious rules, but pushing God out of the way in our lives because we want what we want. And so see how there's a connection there? Because if God's not going to tell me what to do, you're surely not going to tell me what to do. Who are you? I want my way. So when we say the first of our principles here is desires become damaging because of our sinful heart, we mean that conflict doesn't just come from differences or miscommunication. It comes because we want what we want, and we're willing to do just about anything to get what we want. Back to our 3 elements of conflict. The first one was the spark. People are different, want different things, misunderstandings, miscommunication. I want to watch sports, you want to watch comedy. I want Mexican, you want Chinese. People struggle to communicate, people misunderstand. I thought you said we were going out for Mexican this week because it was Chinese last week. I thought you said you would make the bed. The sparks are our differences, our misunderstandings, our miscommunications. But now we can add number 2, the fuel. The fuel of conflict is our selfishness that says, my desire is most important. More important than what God thinks, more important than what you think. My opinion is most important. My desire is most important. My opinion is most important. Dr. Sandy calls it total self-absorption. Or, to put it very simply, I'm right and you're wrong. Now, this is a very tricky one, because here, selfishness can hide. Because we can feel like, I'm not selfish, I'm just right. I'm not selfish. I'm just right. You're just wrong. Now, in conflict, are we sometimes right? Yeah. But is our foundational assumption that we're always right? Yeah. To be human is to assume that you're always right, unless you become very, very, very broken, which can happen. But for most people, our own self-absorption makes us quite sure that we're always right. So the spark of conflict is our desires, differences, misunderstandings. The fuel is our selfishness that says, I'm right and you're wrong. My desire is more important than yours. Whatever you want, I'm going to get it my way. So we're back to this question, are your desires running your life? Hey, let's add the fire. We've got spark, fuel, fire. Destruction results when we fail to respond properly and allow our sinful desires to continue driving our words and actions. All right, stay here on this slide for a minute. Destruction results when we fail to respond properly and allow our sinful desires to continue driving our words and actions. The Bible says this, we saw already, James 4. You desire but don't have, so you kill. You covet but can't get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. So the fire of conflict is when our desires are in charge and they lead us to do what we should not do to get what we want. Again, stay there on that slide for just a second. Our desires lead us to do what we should not do to get what we want. Okay, so we had, let's put this into words now. A couple different ways, and there are many other ways. This is just two that summarize. Next slide. Spark, we're different. Fuel, I'm right. Fire, I've got to win. We're different. I'm right. I've got to win. Or another way to say that is like this. I want something and you're in the way. I'm going to get what I want. Okay, but then if we stick with that, the fire that's destructive is really when we say, I'm going to get what I want no matter what. Now we've got destruction, right? So maybe, for a couple, it's, I went to sleep in a cool room with the fan on. He says, and she says she wants it warmer and silent. I apologize if I'm stepping on anybody's toes. But the question is, who's going to say, I'm going to get what I want because my desires are in charge? My desires are more important than yours. And so, if I have to pout or manipulate or threaten or be sarcastic or insult you, I'll do whatever I have to do to sleep in my cool room with the fan on or my warm room without the fan on. Now, is that silly? Does that sound silly? Would we really do that? Does that kind of scenario play out millions of times a day in American homes and businesses? Employees fighting over the air conditioner, insulting each other over the air conditioner, threatening each other over the air conditioner, being sarcastic over the air conditioner, pouting over the air conditioner. Why would we go that far? Because we want what we want. And there's nothing more threatening to the human heart than the possibility that you might have to give up on what you want. That is a line human beings don't want to cross. All right, so desires become damaging because of our sinful heart. My desires are in charge, and I'll do whatever I have to do to get what I want. Now, I don't mean to suggest that marriage and family therapy can't help. There are many communication tools and methods of understanding one another that can help. There are strategies for learning to compromise, but to really have peaceful, loving relationships, we're going to need more than tips and tricks. There's something broken in the human heart that is resulting in broken relationships. And tips and tricks are going to be Band-Aids for what's broken. The good news is that God knows where the brokenness came from, and God can heal the human heart. That's where we're going to go next.